Welcome to the Trust Factor Radio, bringing you interviews and insights to unlock the power of the subconscious mind to create authority, credibility, and trust. With your host, the Authority Architect, and best-selling author, Neil Howe.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my special guest is David Hitt. He is the president of Splat Inc., and he has done a lot of writing on his blog, and he has a podcast also called Sight Unseen. And we're going to get a lot of information from David today about digital marketing and what people are looking for and the new trends and what's going on. So welcome to the show, David Hitt.
Thank you very much, Neil. Nice to be here.
Well, give us a little bit more of your background. How did you get started in all of this? And tell me about Splat.
Well, how I got started, that's always an interesting question. I actually have my degree originally from a graduate school is in landscape architecture. So, of course, I went on to become a digital marketer. My business started 18 years ago as a specialty digital marketing services provider to the real estate industry. And the sort of transition from architecture and landscape architecture came by way of 3D animation. And I had been tasked to teach myself how to illustrate sort of unbuilt real estate projects about 20 years ago. And in the process of learning those tools, I eventually kind of decided I wanted to start my own business. And I started Splat, and in its original incarnation, we did these really sexy illustrations and videos of unbuilt skyscrapers in and around the Northeast. And as the company evolved and the economy changed, people started asking us to design websites for them. And as the company evolved and the economy changed, the nature of those websites changed. SEO became a lot more important. And in the meantime, we'd sort of decided that there wasn't much of a future in 3D renderings and animation for us as a company. So we stopped doing that, and we focused exclusively on both website development and design, but sort of post-launch, all of the sorts of digital marketing tactics that typically help brands to thrive on the web. So that sort of got us to where we're at now, which is basically a more or less full-service design and development studio that has chops in SEO as well.
Yeah, well, I love it how people just, fall into things and fall into the career that they were meant to do. You find out what it is that you really like and find out what you're also good at and being able to help people. So what kind of people do you help? Who needs digital marketing services?
Well, historically, we have worked with probably three different types of clients. We've worked I should actually begin by saying my first client was a real estate attorney, a very highly connected and well-known real estate attorney in Philadelphia, which is where we're based, Philadelphia, PA, USA. And that sort of first client introduced us to the sort of two verticals that we still do a lot of work in, which is real estate and law or professional services. So we have, typically our clients are professional service organizations, lawyers, accountants, architects, engineers, or real estate entities in both sort of business to consumer and business to business roles. Mm-hmm.
So what kind of problems are they having then with their digital marketing?
I think it's different depending on the industry or the vertical we're serving. I think the recurring I think there's a lot of confusion. It's interesting in the survey, you gave me some questions to answer, and one of your questions was about misconceptions. And I think that's kind of one of the sort of recurring issues that we address. When we sort of sit down with a client initially, lots of times they know they need us, and they know that we have services that can get their brand or their content or whatever it is they're trying to get noticed, but they're not really sure how we're going to do that. So I think the first problem that we solve typically is explaining what we can do, what we are unlikely to be able to do. And as a result of this sort of confusion and a need to coalesce goals, almost every client that we begin working with, we do some sort of audit or assessment document for at the beginning of our work with them.
So it's really setting expectations and really looking at the business to see what it is that they actually really need.
Yeah, and what's possible. I think I noticed you've talked to a lot of digital marketing and SEO folks, I think, already. And the industry changes very quickly. And what was once possible 5 years ago using old school SEO tactics is no longer possible or obtainable easily. So you have to modify your tactics, obviously. And part of my role is to make sure I'm, like you said, setting reasonable expectations and also deploying sort of the most current approach and tactics that are actually likely to succeed for our clients.
Right. I mean, something like SEO, you've really got to look at not only what's working now, but where things are going in the future, because you can really get caught out if you don't keep up with it. So tell me about what you can do for your clients. What are they in the need of? Are they needed a modern website or just SEO, or is it all a combination of everything?
It depends on the client, and often it's both. We began offering digital marketing services on top of the design and development that we did for two reasons. One, because we knew enough about SEO so that we knew that there were things that needed to be done at the time that the site was actually designed and built. And, part of that sort of education process that you have to go through with a client is making them aware that there are SEO concerns right at the outset, that you don't, ideally you want to do, on-page keyword research and on-page SEO right at the outset of the launch of the site or the redesign of the site. There's also SEO issues that relate to the redesign of websites that are sort of technical in nature. So we started doing digital marketing because those services really fall hand in hand with development. So frequently we find both sets of needs in our clients, and really it's a matter of things like timing and budget to sort of assess, where we start. But usually we start with the website because at the end of the day, the website is still it's the one asset you own on the web as a brand. Mm-hmm. There aren't a lot of owned assets these days. There's been an increasing tendency towards assets that people rely on for marketing, but that really aren't owned by the brand. So I'm not sure I really answered your question, but it depends on the client, really. And it also depends on their budget and how much time they have.
Right. And, I was just reading this morning an article from Neil Patel, who is, one of the leaders in SEO, sure, one of those influencers. And he said the future really is in that branding. And right. Google is really looking to award people that are searched out by business names. So how does a company like a law firm or a real estate agency really work on that branding online?
That's a really interesting question, I think, especially as it relates to law firms. Law firms are an interesting beast because, they're a partnership model of business. And working with a law firm can seem a lot like the old expression, herding cats, because the lack of a hierarchical structure means that lots of opinions matter. So when you're working with them, it's kind of best to involve as many decision makers as possible, and there are more of them at law firms. The interesting thing about branding in law firms is that law firms sort of have multiple personalities.
Right.
in the sense that we talk to our firm clients about the overarching brand that their firm has. So in other words, depending on where they're located and the number of staff they have and the types of practice areas that they specialize in, they do have an institutional brand. And like any branding process, we attempt to sort of tease those values out, tease those value differentiators out, and sort of be able to sort of form them into a cohesive brand narrative. But the other thing about law firms is that they're also sort of a cult of many different brand personalities. Many law firms still bring in work based on the individual reputations of partners within them. So a big topic of conversation these days in marketing for lawyers is personal branding. How do individual lawyers develop a brand narrative and amplify that narrative on the web? So we're actually working on a proposal right now where we're not social media specialists, really. So we brought in a social media firm to help us work with an existing law firm, and we're doing personal branding, workshops essentially for individual partner level attorneys that want to become rainmakers.
Mm-hmm. So what does that personal branding look like? What if we have a lawyer within the firm that really, yes, they want to help the firm, or they're hired by the firm, but they really want to, brand themselves as the expert in whatever kind of law they do. What kind of things should they be doing?
Well, I think personal branding looks a lot like branding. When we talk to individual lawyers, there's obviously only so much work that a lawyer can do on marketing himself or herself above and beyond their billable hours that they do. But LinkedIn or Twitter are the two most obvious social channels. And like a brand, if I were advising a brand that was attempting to become an authority in a given vertical, I would tell them the same thing that I would tell an individual attorney, which is prove it, basically. Prove it by means of either writing content or talking about case wins, or you've got to have the chops first, and then you've got to figure out how to get those chops noticed. And there are influencer marketing, I'm sure, is a topic you've discussed. It's sort of a buzzword lately in the industry. But influencer marketing tactics, I think, work really well for personal branding. You want to start having conversations with other authority figures in the industry that might be able to either advertently or inadvertently share your message, amplify your content. So,
Right. And, as sad as this is, I was watching YouTube this morning with my girls. They're 10 and 11. And they're watching these just stupid YouTube stars. And the scenes are absolutely crazy what they do. But what I noticed is they all share each other's videos. So one star will go to another star and they'll do a video together. And they'll, just increase their value and likes that way. So it works for them. It's got to work the same in the business world as well with influencer marketing.
Sure, and it's tough for lawyers to share that way, I think, oftentimes, especially since, they consider their knowledge is proprietary, so it's not natural necessarily for them to do that. But it also, the last word on this topic, it really depends on, the type of lawyer that we're talking about, because obviously like a personal injury lawyer or some other sort of direct-to-consumer attorney has probably more opportunities because they can actually talk to a much wider audience of people. Everybody at some point in their life, God forbid, may need a personal injury lawyer or may need a divorce lawyer. So I think that, social outreach and personal branding for those types of attorneys is a lot. The opportunities are greater, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's switch it a bit here, David, and talk about the SEO and actually getting found when somebody is doing a search. What's important from that aspect, and what's working now?
Well, I think my first response to that would be misconceptions about what maybe isn't working so well anymore.
Okay.
It is not working so well for low domain authority sites to produce content and expect for that content to produce lots of site traffic initially, nor is it especially likely that that content is ever going to rank in the long term in the absence of some help. Mm-hmm. So I think that these days one needs to, content creation is maybe a third of the effort, and the other 2/3 of your effort, or maybe it's 50-50, is amplification, getting your content found and getting people to find and share your content is harder than it used to be, which is why people are talking about influencer marketing, I think, because if you're going to shoot to have somebody share your content, you should probably aim for someone that has 5,000 followers rather than someone that has 50 on Twitter. The third thing is, and this doesn't get talked about much, link building and all of the sort of old school long-term SEO tactics are still important if you want content to rank in the long term. And other things that are important are the user experience on your website. So yeah, it's the other thing I think we bring to the table is we design, thoughtful, logical user experiences on our sites, and it's an indirect ranking factor for SEO. So, Google understands that if people are visiting, click a link and immediately leave the site that they've clicked to, that's important, and that ends up being a ranking factor ultimately. So, it's kind of this whole holistic combination of activities, I think, that helps drive traffic in terms of content or product listings or whatever we're talking about.
So is it important now to have those rich media things like video and audio on your website, or is it just as effective to have good content?
Well, it obviously depends on the client. We deal with a lot of clients that, like I said, are sort of professional service clients who, can sort of prove their worth through writing. But we also deal with direct-to-consumer real estate developers all the time. And for those types of clients, like if the content is sexy and it's going to get people to stay on the site, and if it's regularly updated so that people have a reason to sort of visit the site, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, what the content type is. I mean, there are certain issues related to videos that there are different types of videos, obviously, but like if you're selling a real estate project and what you're trying to show is, beautiful views or beautiful bedrooms or beautiful kitchens or, beautiful common areas, then I think video, makes perfect sense. I'm content agnostic, I guess.
Well, let's talk about the technical side of things, because it seems like Google and the other search engines too are really looking to make sure that the technical aspect of websites are really in place and making that a ranking factor too. How important are things like time on site and click-through rates and things like that?
Well, they're important. Time on site, the amount of time that as a ranking factor, I'm not sure that time on site is ultimately ends up contributing greatly as a ranking factor. Bounce rate is a ranking factor, but actual continuous time on per visit, I'm not sure that ends up being a ranking factor. I can't really speak to that, to be honest with you. I think what I read about and what we're concerned about are flaws in the architecture of the site. So page speed is definitely a ranking factor and pretty important. Google has an initiative called Accelerated Mobile Pages, AMP, which for websites that publish a lot of content, it's important that they make their sites AMP compliant, because Google cares about that and has made it a ranking factor. And basically, that's a little fix or overlay, a code overlay that you have to add to a website that makes the content load much faster. It's a sort of framework for creating speedy websites. And most major publishers, news outlets, etc., have made their sites AMP compliant these days. So that's certainly important. And then things like, 404 pages and 301 redirects, all of those sort of technical on-page components are still important and still get noticed, and still will drag your site down. If there are too many things wrong with your website, Google notices those things and doesn't look upon them favorably.
And I believe today is the day that Google Chrome is also putting that not secure verbiage on your site if you've got HTTP instead of HTTPS.
Is today the day?
I believe so. We're July 24th, 2018 here.
Right.
And how do you fix that problem?
You install what's called an SSL certificate, which I believe stands for Secure Socket Layer, but I'm not sure. It's a process that you do at the level of the hosting of the website, and most hosts have anticipated this day in history and have made it pretty easy to make your sites HTTPS, but it's certainly something that everyone with a website needs to be doing. And I know we don't really host on sort of the really well-known platforms too much, although I'm not going to speak poorly about them. But I know that one of our clients was on GoDaddy, and GoDaddy did a really proactive job of informing people that they needed to go to HTTPS and making it very easy for them to do that. So yeah, HTTPS is certainly something that if people haven't done to their websites, they need to make them secure.
Well, we've talked about some of the misconceptions about digital marketing and SEO, but what are some of the fears? What kind of fears might be holding people back from hiring a company to do some of this work for them?
I think the biggest fear is misconceptions about the value. I know that we were talking, and you visited our website, I know, before our chat this morning, and our slogan is Digital Demystified. And that's speaking to a pain point, I think, that clients have, which is they really don't understand what the heck we do. And they really don't understand the value of what we do. And oftentimes, the marketplace being the marketplace, people aren't used to necessarily paying up front for an audit or an assessment. But typically, in order to sort of completely understand the challenges and opportunities that a client might have in terms of digital marketing, you have to begin that process with a pretty thorough assessment. And that assessment includes looking at their website. So I have difficulty. I will sometimes do a little bit of free work, to be honest, so that I can start having a discussion with a client about their digital marketing needs. And for instance, I'll do a bit of a technical assessment sometimes on a website, and we'll say things like, hey, did you know that there's a lot of broken links on your website? Did you know that there's a lot of URLs that are throwing 404 pages? Did you know that, if you're thinking about redesigning your website, do you know about 301 redirects? And do you understand how those sort of transmit and preserve SEO juice, that like basically your site's going to lose authority if you just sort of redesign your website in the absence of having a migration strategy. So it's oftentimes, I think, the misconceptions or fears come from a lack of understanding, and I would add the historical prevalence of con artists.
Right. Yes, there's definitely a lot of people in the industry that will claim to be able to do a lot for less, and it generally doesn't work out. You really get what you pay for. So I think most business owners do understand that they got to find a reputable company to do the work for them and not answer these. I can give you the world for $100 a month emails that they might be getting. What are some of the little known pitfalls or common mistakes that you see business owners make that might be trying to do this themselves?
I think a really common thing is not understanding meta tags, SEO meta tags. For instance, as recently as 3 years ago, I was on another agency's website, and I knew that this agency's strengths was not SEO, and I questioned whether they knew what they were doing, and I got a little snarky and began looking at all their top level pages, and none of them had written correct title information. So just a meta title tag. So that the tag that is sort of at the broadest level tells the search engines what the content on your page is about. These are like meta tags are becoming less important, but it's kind of like learning how to write. You can learn how to write without having your prose be legible or learning to cross your T's or dot your I's. But that's sort of, if you're a purist, that's sort of where it all begins. And, the title tag is where your website starts talking, semantically in words to search engines. So that's a rank amateur mistake that I've seen many times over the years. I think one of my favorite stories. This was from a few years ago, but I had a potential client that they'd read about content and its importance, and they wanted to start a blog, and they wanted to start producing content, and they talked to us about sort of making that process easier because they were having difficulties uploading content to the back end of their WordPress website. So their solution to the problems that they were having was to just take snapshots of the text blog posts that they were writing and post them as JPEGs. Which means that none of the text in all of in any posts that they wrote were crawlable, or it means that they had taken their best intentions and completely sabotaged them.
Well, a little knowledge goes a long way. That is for sure. David, give me an example of somebody that you have worked with. A story that sticks out in your mind. They came to you with problems. Tell me what the problem was, how you were able to help them, and ultimately what that outcome was for the business.
Sure. There are no rules about what you find amongst clients. In other words, we find established, mature businesses sometimes that really have a lot of shortcomings in both their, let's just talk generally speaking, on the web. They have shortcomings. We have a client on the West Coast that is a very seasoned and well-known law firm, and they are a direct-to-consumer law firm, and the principal, their founder, had built this huge local reputation for himself using traditional broadcast media appearances. So he's a talking head, basically. He's a legal authority figure locally on the airwaves, on both radio and television. And he's a visionary in many ways, but he grew his business, over the last 20 years on the air. principally. And they came to us and said, we want to start having the same impact digitally that we're having through other marketing and advertising channels that we're doing. So this has been a great experience for both client and consultant because they are very committed to producing content. They write content. They do a lot of traditional PR and marketing activities. They're a dream client in the sense that they're highly committed to marketing, but they never really focused their efforts on digital. And so, we designed a new website for them, and the website is, without bragging, I think it's a vast improvement visually and in terms of user experience. It's very easy to navigate. It gave them, we also rebranded them. So in terms of the changes that we made to the logo and the website and the photography, that whole sort of like nurturing that we gave to their brand, we created a better website for them and a better place, a better landing place for all of the paid advertising they're now doing. But I think the most satisfying role that we're playing ongoing is we're developing a sort of progressive, best of breed content marketing strategy for them. So we're taking a lot of the content that they've been just instinctively producing, and we're saying, hey, look, have you thought about doing some research to see how well this content aligns with what people are actually searching for? So we started sort of informing their content marketing process with keyword research right at the very beginning, and we're producing, content ideas for them, and we're working with a social media agency to make sure that there's this sort of seamless start to finish, fit and finish to their content marketing, and that for me is kind of like the most. Fixing problems that have been caused by other people is part of our jobs, but it's much more satisfying to sort of work with a client to get them started on a journey that ongoing will become instinctive to them and will represent tools and practices that will get them the results they're seeking.
Right.
So it's sort of like it's an sort of constant theme of this chat. It's about dialogue and education. With clients, I think.
So if somebody is looking for a digital marketing firm to do some of their marketing for them, what kind of questions should they be asking to make sure that they're picking the right one?
Well, I think they should come to the table understanding their own objectives, and I think that they should come to the table having a rough idea of what they're willing or capable of spending. Those are the two things sort of the prospective client needs to bring to the table. And then what they need to seek from, it's then sort of aligning those objectives and, pocketbook to the right vendor. Money is important simply because some agencies just don't work below or above certain price points very well. So I would say, it's hard. I think that's a really important criteria to apply to your choice of a vendor. So I wouldn't, as a client, if I had, $150,000 to spend on a website, that probably suggests that I shouldn't be hiring a lot of firms who are too small or too inexperienced. So knowing your budget is likewise, if I only have $3,000 to spend, that also creates a situation where you could have a lot of useless conversations because there are a lot of agencies that aren't going to take your work, below that price point. So I think, having an honest discussion about resources is important. And then particular industry experience can or cannot be important. In other words, if you're an e-commerce retailer, I think it probably is important that you, hire an agency that's probably has those sort of hybrid development and SEO skills, because again, for e-commerce, both design, development, and SEO are very important. So, I would ask, summarizing, you want to have an honest discussion about resources, experience, and then you want to, you have to rely on instinct is what I'm sort of fumbling with, I think, too. Some people just work well together, and some people just understand objectives at an instinctual level. Not everybody's right for every client, and
right.
A personal meeting still offers insights into partnership viability that phone conversations or email exchanges just never will.
Right. It's definitely true. You've got to get that face-to-face just to feel if they are right for you, give you that level of trust, making sure that they have your best interests at heart and are steering
Absolutely.
you in the right direction, which it certainly seems like you do with your clients, David. Now, if people want to reach out to you, David, and Splat, how do they get in touch with you?
We're on the web at splatworld.tv. We are also on our web. Obviously, we have more traditional contact methods, including telephone. We're located in Philadelphia, and I am on Twitter at Davey, which is DAAVEEY. Resourceful people ought to be able to get in touch with us with that much information, I think.
Yes, definitely. And I'll make sure it's all in the show notes as well. Well, David Hitt, the president of Splat Inc., thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you, Neil.
Factor Radio today.
It's been delightful. I appreciate the opportunity to be your guest and to have a nice conversation.
Definitely. And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we'll see you next time on the show.
You've been listening to the Trust Factor Radio with Neil Howe. To learn about the resources mentioned in the show and to listen to past episodes, go to thetrustfactorradio.com. To get a copy of the book, The Trust Factor, go to thetrustfactorbook.com. If you are ready to act now and build your authority, credibility, and trust, schedule a consultation with Neil at theauthorityarchitect.com.